Guys, welcome, David. We're going to dive into a conversation. As people who throw events, it matters. It matters what they look like. It matters how our people feel, our attendees feel when they walk in. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that from clearly a master, someone who has more than 10,000 hours. Actually, let's do this first. How many people, let's estimate how many people daily experience your work. Let's build that from the bottoms up.
I haven't really done the math, except I feel like with the I have 4 shows running on Broadway right now. I have a couple shows on the West End, a bunch of shows around the country and touring, and then I have a bunch of television stuff. I'd say like, give or take, a couple million.
A day?
Yeah.
I mean, just out of curiosity, how much money is that making?
I don't know.
But have you seen the Hamilton ticket prices?
I have seen the Hamilton ticket
okay,
prices.
well, okay, we're going to dive in.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with these uber creative, uber successful people, and they're giving you their grand vision, let's dive right into your process. How do you start? How do you begin?
Okay, so a lot of people want to ask me what is the difference between Hamilton and Bruno Mars and a restaurant and a gallery and all that stuff, and my answer is it's the exact same. The process is the same. So I really liken my job to one of a therapist. I basically sit in a little blue chair in my office. My client comes in and sits on a couch, and it doesn't matter really who it is, but I start with a lot of conversation and a lot of what is it that you want people to feel while they experience this thing. Patrons, audience members, whatever it is, what is this consumer journey, beginning, middle, and end? What are the emotions and what are the adjectives, right? And so I basically listen. And, I say a therapist because a therapist really, tries to understand what the problem is, what the issue is, what the snapshot of is in that exact moment, and then figure out a way to work through it or give people tools to work through it. You guys all know that advertisement doesn't really work, or the old traditional way of advertising doesn't really work. 60-second, 30-second spots, full-page ads in the New York Times, those things work, but not as much as getting the right 12 influencers to see your thing and talk about it, right? So my job is to take that conversation, figure out what people want people to feel, their clients and their consumers to feel, and then I Jedi mind trick them into feeling and thinking that way.
And you're saying you get the people, their audience, to feel that way. Feeling is an interesting place to go, so let's go there.
Yeah, well,
what do you mean? What does somebody say to you? I want them to feel happy? I want them to feel excited?
Yeah, I mean, I've had clients who would say, I want them to feel like they are smarter than they were when they came in. I want them to feel contemplative. I want them to feel sad. I want them to feel challenged. I want them to feel, in the case of a restaurant, like they're walking into home, like they're coming back home to a home-cooked meal.
What did Kanye say?
Well, it's interesting. Kanye, I have a almost photographic memory, not quite. And I obviously trade in the currency of ideas, and I trade in visual images. And when he and I first started working together, he would send me a bunch of images, and I look at books and magazines, and I really kind of a voracious reader. And he sent me, out of let's say 50 images, 45 of them I had never seen before. And I was like, where are you getting these? Do you have a research team? What? And it was really fascinating. That was not a train I felt like I could be on forever, but it was. But I gotta say, I came onto his team right after George Bush Hates Black People and Taylor Swift, Your Video's Worse Than Beyonce, right? Both of those statements in that moment felt true, but he was sent away. Right, he just didn't have a good bedside manner. They were like, "Hey, he wants to come back. Will you work with him?" I did, and he sent all these scintillating visual images. And his idea was he sent me raw, kind of 4 furies, water, wind, fire, air kinds of images. And really, he didn't have the words to say it, but he really kind of wanted to deify himself, right? He wanted people to have this moment of worship, look up to. You're seeing a seminal artist in a seminal place, and he couldn't quite say that, but I could tell from the images. And so we built a thing where instead of flash and trash video screens and monitors and stuff that lighting and rock and roll tours have become, we built a huge artifact. That was the first thing we built, a 40-foot wide artifact. He went the other way. And then as we continued to work and evolve the thing, it was a lot about monolithic things the 2001, big, huge black, obelisk and things like that. And if you saw his last tour, which I did not do, but as a further continuation of the arc of who he wanted to be as an artist, he was literally on a floating platform, and people underneath him were literally forced to kind of deify him. And it's kind of like, it was, when I was working with him, it was previous to Yeezus and that whole iteration of himself. But he was touching on those ideas, and my idea is one of a therapist, or my job. I listen to him, and I create a way to set him on the path for success of what he.
It's amazing. Well, since we were looking at Hamilton, how did they want the audience to feel? What kind of raw material were you given as a therapist when you walked into that discussion?
So in that case, those guys, the whole team, Lynn and Tommy and Andy, the choreographer, the director, the writer, we're friends, we're collaborators, we've worked on a lot of things together. Lynn came into my office, Lynn's the writer. He dropped a 25,000 word, 51 song manuscript on my desk that took place over 30 years, countless locations, and said, here's what it sounds like. I have no idea what it looks like or how it moves or any of those things. And so, and no one knew that it would become what it is, but I just knew that I really, really liked it. There we started to work on it like as if it was a movie, as if we were going to render every single location realistically. The nice thing is there's photographs and etchings and paintings and stuff, and you can go to a lot of the locations. And so I researched it, and I put together like an entire storyboard of all 25,000 words of what it would look like. But then I knew we were going to never be able to render every single location realistically. That'd be ridiculous. So we had to work in metaphor. The story of Hamilton is not of the people who built the country. The story is about the people who built the scaffolding from which the country was built. And so the kind of big theatrical idea is, let's build a space that is aspirational. It's in the middle of being built. And, I came up with the double turntable thing because it was cinematic and it represented the swirling, political storm that he gets himself into, and also he's swept off of Nevis by a hurricane, blah, 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 blah. We can talk about that later. But the idea of, if I'm doing my job right, sometimes people are like, oh, wow, David Corns is amazing. But mostly, they have no idea what hand is at work. So with Hamilton, they look and they say, brick and wood. Great job. And the turntables. They say the turntable because it's obvious, right? The scenic designer, the production designer stepped on stage in a way, and it's like, we move performers. They're not standing still. But we went through 33 variations of brick color tone to get to the perfect color tone so that the complexions of a 99% minority cast could look perfect in front of that color tone.
33.
33. Wow. So, it's a little bit too red, it's a little bit too brown, it's a little bit too beige, and people, all of these trillions of decisions go into finding a way so that no one has ever watched Hamilton and said, I couldn't hear the words or I couldn't see the performers, right? We all know that every single decision matters. The audience looks at it and says, brick, wood, right? So I like to just pat myself on the back. But, and
I saw this, and I saw the play. I remember, I didn't even notice it. I read about it afterwards, but the set actually changes in the middle of the play. Is that right?
It does. So there's obviously, as I said, overt design choices. Oh, hey, guys. That we make, like the turntable. There's a lot of really subconscious stuff going on. So in between Act 1 and Act 2, the walls actually grow 8 feet tall. So the war is over, they go home and they start governing the country. And, you don't see this happen unless you're staring at the set, but you're reading your program or buying merchandise or running the restroom or whatever it is. But the walls grow, and the profile at the top of that wall changes because it was important for me to find a way to show that the country is continuing to be built. And you don't see it happen, but my belief is you feel it in a different way, that the massing and the overall profundity of the structure kind of weighs on you in a subconscious way. We sub out a bunch of the props, so we go from rifles to like maps and sort of like literary, we go from utilitarian things to sort of more governing tools. And maybe one person out of the 1,300 people in the Broadway theater will notice that at night. But for one person that they see, like, God, the walls are different, that is profound. But for the 1,299 other people, that is a subconscious thing that they can't quite put their finger on, but it does affect you differently. And we work in design and, as creative directors, and we really, that gets into the Jedi mind trick, right? We are not the drones you're looking for. And they're like, right. Those walls are bigger. We feel
it's subtle, but it's important. And you've talked about feeling, and I love this idea. Our job is to figure out what the brand or the creator wants them to feel. And so after talking to you, I looked online. You use a fun term. I don't know if you coined it. Audience barometer. Did you make it up?
I did coin that.
All right, it's yours.
So guys, I want
No one
one
you can tweet
penny
it
every
later.
time. Okay, so let me explain what audience barometer is. And I feel like I have a good one. I don't know that it's perfect, but I feel like I have a really good one. And what's interesting is we all work with people who are limited in our own ways. I'm certainly limited. I have some strengths and a lot of weaknesses. The audience barometer is one that I think I'm pretty good at. And it'll be interesting if you guys really think about this and think about your businesses and your clients. The audience barometer is, at this moment, I think, when you ask me about the audience barometer, everyone's going to really think that they're really interested. That's what you're going to think, Ben.
Totally, but they are. You can tell.
And like a third of them are like, who the fuck cares? Remember the bongo drummer? Like, that was amazing. I met him backstage. His name's David. He's cool. The audience barometer is when a person who's making a piece or a performance or an experience thinks that the audience is going to get something. And they assume, oh, that's going to translate perfectly. And my job is like, guess what, Ben? They're not going to care as much about the audience barometer as they are about Kanye's comeback.
Like, what's an example? What's somebody who said something that their audience barometer was completely off?
I mean, if you've ever seen a show that you thought was going to be interesting and it wasn't, they messed up, right? Or brands are always like, we want people to feel like we're welcoming and so amazing, but they actually wind up feeling elite. Right? Or someone that's like, it's like someone who runs a not-for-profit and gives you a super fancy business card, and they go, here's my card, and you're like, it's too thick, it's too embossed, they clearly spend a shitload of money, and they're trying to like raise a lot of money from me saying they're a poor organization. They just missed, right? So it's my job to be like, guess what? I get it that you want the card, you have one chance to make a first impression, but the card is just way too fancy, and you're like, we're scrapping, and right? You guys with me? So some people just think like, oh, but the card is so important. Actually, you've got to like check yourself, and oftentimes we're so inside of the experience and inside of like wanting to like, make people feel good about everything that we can't see the forest from the trees. And the audience barometer is really important. I mean, the business card is one example, but there are countless, and every one of the feathered fish that we make, it's like, and then at the end, we're going to end with fireworks, which people just think are expensive, right? As an example. So you're like, you want people to feel warm and amazing.
Okay, so we're starting off with sitting down as a therapist, and you're trying to understand what they want someone to feel. Then you're immediately checking their ego and making sure that their audience barometer is on. But now let's talk about what you do. So we've talked through a couple tools in our conversations that you use to get feelings to happen. And I think I've tried to track them to all 5 senses. So let's go through some of the major tools that you use to make someone feel something.
Well, in design, obviously we use color, line, texture, architecture, scale, proportion, right? We all get those things. Things are different. If I made a staircase and I made it 6 inches to the rise, you would glide down the staircase perfectly, right? In opera, we do that so that the soprano can sing her aria and not go, ah, right? That. When I designed Pee Wee Herman, I made the stairs 12 inches high so that he clomped up the stairs. He felt like a little boy in a playhouse, right? And so there are those things.
Scale,
those
yeah.
Scale in proportion, color, texture, all those things. People, like the fancy term is feng shui. You don't put your back to the door if you want someone to feel comfortable. You lower the ceiling if you want to create a pressure cooker. You raise the ceiling if you want to feel more space. You wouldn't paint a tiny room red. We all know those kinds of things, right? Meanwhile, everyone's like, oh my God, my bathroom's red.
Literally right.
They're like, mental note, hang on a second. But also, making experiences, people's attachment to an experience doesn't start when they walk in the door. It starts with how you heard about it, the pamphlet, the flyer, the email, how people talk about it, the adjectives people use, scent. I mean, I think we had a little conversation about scent. Who here has, you can shout it out, what do you think is a really comforting smell? Anyone? Bacon, lavender, right? Anyone else? Vanilla. Right. So the number one, I believe we can check this, the number one most homey, comforting smell is cinnamon. So if you ever want to sell your house, what you're supposed to do is like take cinnamon, boil it in water, and then when you're showing your apartment or your house, people walk in and they go like, apple pie. And they don't know. Jedi mind trick, right? You ever want to feel a little bit powerful? Put your seat like 1 inch higher than the person you're having a conversation with.
You did that in your office. I knew it.
I mean, I did it right before you walked in because I was like, Ben, heavy hitter. Anyway, we use all those things. Scent, it's a huge one. Scent's the number one sense that actually goes right to the through line of your emotions, right? So color theory, if anyone's ever heard of that, you spend a little time, Bono's way ahead of the curve. Spend a little time like with, shaded glasses. They really change the way you think. Color therapy, light therapy, he didn't want to hear. But that's really true, and it really does work. Sound, oral landscapes. I mean, these are all obvious things, but if you really kind of like check yourself and think about what do I want people to feel, why would you only use one sense, right?
I love that. Out of show of hands, who's using scents in their events? Ooh, we got some good ones. You guys.
Wow.
Okay, so and I guess when I'm thinking about scents too, while you were speaking, I remembered that you have done work for restaurants. I hadn't thought about that, but maybe could you talk a bit about the types of people that hire? What do you call yourself? I don't even know. Is it experience designer, set designer? What are we calling you?
I mean, I guess it depends on the room. I'm usually like a creative director.
And so who hires you? Who's interested in this type of work in 2017?
Well, the short answer is everyone hires me. I've been asked. I don't mean literally, but I mean I have always found that I have transferable skills, and I'm very excited by the idea of working in lots of different mediums. So to me, I'm not like a theatrical set designer, a production designer, a film or TV. I'm excited to think about the whole world has to be designed. I had an aha moment when I was really young. I was driving my car through a parking lot, and I ran through one of those huge puddles, and I was like, damn, everything in the world needs to be designed. This is a huge puddle, and obviously like the irrigation or the drainage system was like botched. And in that moment, I was like, even if it's poorly designed or not thought about, it's a design, right? And it's an experience. And so really anyone can hire me. I did a couple of restaurants where they were just like, we're done, we're about to open. Can you come look at the temperature of the lighting? We think it's off. Right, so I've, brought in teams and gelled lighting and, changed angles and things like that. I've worked on.
Were they right?
Completely. Well,
their audience barometer was on?
Their audience barometer was on, and they knew they botched it. But the architecture firm's audience barometer is way off. The last thing you want to do in like a sushi place is like look at raw fish and look at the person you're sitting against and just it's like a disaster. What was going on was a disaster, right? And by the way, I could put a Band-Aid on it, and then we had to shut the restaurant down 6 months later and actually rip out the entire ceiling, which was a whole other thing. But they were completely off, and the restaurant cost $6 million. So imagine, it doesn't matter like how beautiful the banquet was, it was really unbelievably sad for that restaurateur, and they had a smart enough audience barometer, but it wasn't baked into the DNA of the project. They just trusted the name. And so sometimes you need like that show doctor, you need that person to kind of like walk through the experience. And what's not on that reel are many, many, many things that I've worked with, including large brands and organizations and channels and companies where they've got a thing, and I just walk in and they like, will you experience this thing before we have the real people experience it?
Wow, test run. Beta it, pilot it.
Yeah, I said earlier, we're so inside of our experiences and our hopes, hope springs hope springs eternal, and we just want so badly for our things to be good that we sometimes get blinded by it, and it's nice to have a person whose only bias is, I really want this to work. And you have to have a thick enough skin to be like, I can hear this. And I roll in and kind of give 2 notes, because I, as a person who makes experiences, know you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I know this thing's about to happen tomorrow, and we're not gonna like ditch the whole thing, but I can maybe give 2 helpful thoughts.
And I guess I'm thinking about, can I hire you? Can brands hire you? Are we allowed to?
Of course, allowed to.
Oh, well,
I have a
guess
trophy.
maybe I should say, can I afford
my
you?
trophy?
Okay, since this is a no tweet zone, can we afford you? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, it's
for two ideas, we might be able to.
What I think is cool, and it's like a blessing and a curse, is because I came up through the theater. I basically know how to make miracles for no money. And and really and truly, like I was saying to someone out in the lobby, I know how to put together things with like contact lenses and dental floss, and it's like it only has to hold up for like 36 more seconds. Let's do that. And I have literally worked for no money for $500, and then add a bunch of zeros onto the back of that.
That sounds great. Perfect.
And so. One time only discount for this room.
Perfect.
5 cents. But I mean, I think the short answer is, can you afford me? Can you afford not to have someone like that, right? So, the truth is, like, when I moved to New York almost 20 years ago, you could do shows and projects for $500, for $1,500, for $5,000, for $15,000. I have no idea what your marketing budgets are and what your experiential budgets are, but we're like solidly at this crossroad where, pop culture experiences. We all spend, oh my God, I left my phone out there. That's amazing. We all spend so much time like this, right, with phones. It's an insular, alone, technologically based moment. And the pendulum has swung so far the other way, because it's this way, all day we're like this, that people would pay any amount of money for a human experience, for someone to say, shut off your fucking phone for 2 hours. You can't call anyone. You can't be accessible. And I can list, not just Hamilton, but I can list a zillion palpable, visceral, human-based, connected experiences that people are desiring. And the pendulum is as far that way as it is this way with the insular cell phone thing. And it's amazing to think, if you have the right people who see it and experience it, how profound that. I don't have to tell you guys. You know what the reach is, and so the cost is marginal compared to what the upside is.
To get it right.
To get it right.
To get that feeling.
Well, we've all seen it go wrong, and it's like the
blackout.
What used to be 15 years ago. Thank you. Like the bad Yelp review, and how much people like jump through hoops to try and like erase that and deal with that, and you're giving away free stuff. You really do only have one chance to make a good first impression, and that lasting thing, it's like, what is it worth? And you're going to spend twice as much and take twice as long if you're doing it in the venue than if you're baking it into the DNA of what's going on.
Awesome. Great stuff. I want to switch gears a little bit. So I follow you on Twitter, and I did a little research, and it seems like you're involved in an organization that deals with implicit bias. Is that right?
That is right.
That's amazing that you do that. And I'd love for you to walk through it, both because I think it's an important thing for all of us to know about, but also because our jobs are to change people's brains, right? To redirect their neural pathways. And I think that's a lot of what you do in your work. So if you could spend a little time talking about what you're passionate about, and also how it applies to what we do. And
so has anyone ever heard of the IAT test? No one?
What is it?
That's actually really interesting, right? So it's a touch test that was developed about 20 years ago, which can scientifically talk about your bias for something. So I'm a science guy. I believe in art and experiences, but I also believe that, this Jedi mind trick thing and Feng Shui, there's something real about it. If you have a drippy, loud air conditioner over your head, it doesn't make you feel good, right? It changes the way that you feel about the world and your space. So I saw this article 5 years ago about this implicit bias test, the IAT test, and I was like, oh my God, if you can test bias and scientifically prove it, you could maybe change it, right? So if you go into your mind and you think about and let yourself be racist and ridiculous, and you think, what do people respect more in the world, men or women? Good answer, but the bias is towards men, in case you didn't know, right? Tall people or short people, right? Overweight people or fit people, right? You go with me, and there's a way to prove it. So I was fascinated. So I contacted this center that created this test, and I went down and saw them, and there's crazy stuff. So, for instance, people think women have a higher threshold of pain because they give birth to children, and so therefore they can handle it, and they also menstruate. So it hurts, and men are babies, and so women have a higher threshold of pain. Not true, right? People think that African Americans have a higher threshold of pain because they have an amazing athletic prowess and because of their hard struggle. Not true. So if you are an African American woman and you go to the emergency room, you shouldn't go alone, because on average, you would get a quarter of the amount of pain medication than I would get as a white guy, because I'm basically a whiny bitch, right? And it's true. And it's crazy. So I heard this, and my African-American female partner and I started a company called Blink Twice, where we were like, we have to let people know that. But it's amazing because I Jedi mind trick people into thinking what they want to think, and that's my day job. My hobby in this other company is this company that we do that. So it's like this amazing thing. If you have blonde hair and you're a woman, you should dye your hair darker in the job hunt. I hate to say it, it's true.
It sucks.
Right? Glasses
What about
help
redheads?
in the job hunt, right? And there's all this crazy stuff.
So how are you? So can you talk to us about kind of how we can change people's minds with these experiences?
I mean, as I said, each one's a feathered fish. So I can't talk specifically, but I think it would go back to that therapist couch and say, what is it you're trying to achieve, right? So if you're presenting something and you want your CEO to feel, deified, put he or she up on a stage. If you want them to feel welcoming, don't. It's why, like, when you have the presidential debates, they have, like, the town hall version is a different flavor than, like, behind the podium, and on and on and on and on. So I can't tell you, Ben.
That's not fair. Well, so then I'm going to make you use one example, and then we're almost out of time. You had to change people's minds on Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah, well, that was easy. Everyone keep loving Pee Wee Herman.
I love Pee Wee Herman,
Okay,
but he had a tough run.
Does
Come on.
everyone know what happened to Pee Wee Herman? Paul Rubens got caught masturbating in a straight theater, which is interesting. And he was sort of like the last big scandal before the internet really took over, right? So all we saw was that crazy headshot. That was crazy. I don't know if you guys remember that headshot. It was like a mugshot of him. Like, he had long hair. We had only ever really seen him as Pee Wee Herman. And that one wasn't that hard to bring him back, because the truth is, the people who, like the 62-year-old white Jewish women who buy tickets to the theater and drag their husbands along, or whatever that is, they were like, it was 6 years ago, and it had been 20 years. So, and it really wasn't on the internet, because it was kind of before the internet a little bit really took off. So actually, Pee Wee Herman was about reminding people of this person that we all grew up and had like a 9-time Emmy Award winning world that was so creative and amazing, and reminding them of a friend that they always had. And because we were now adults, we were like, whatever, free pass. It was just about like bringing back a thing, acknowledging it. And what was interesting is, like, I had 3 conversations with Paul in which the jokes landed because it was on Broadway. You, again, know your audience. You don't have kids in the audience on Broadway, because like $150 tickets or whatever it was a lot of money, and it wasn't really a kid show, and you're playing at 8 o'clock at night. I was able to say to him, like, when you have that like joke about Cherry and sitting on Cherry, he can look out at the audience and just like with a little smile, he could acknowledge, I masturbated, right? And that was all we needed to do. And I had to be like, we're not doing a kid's show. You don't have to do a kid's show. And so like the double entendre thing that happens on The Simpsons and all those, like those multi-layered things, you just have to be like, you do you, but like allow people to know that we know who you are, and just go with that.
I mean, as crazy as this sounds, a lot of us run technology businesses, but all of us work at brands that are constantly evolving. So I do want to harp a bit on what you said about reminding people that you wink towards the past and you move on to the future, and you give them a new change, a new bias, a new understanding.
Of course, and it's also, thinking about the future, it's like, what does the future look like, right? A lot of times I get asked to do things like make a world, but we want it to feel contemporary. What does 2017 look like, right? And by the time we're done talking about it, it's going to be 2018, and what will that look like and feel like? And so, you've got to... It's just interesting to think about. Everyone has a different idea of the future, and we all saw 2001: Space Odyssey, and like, has that paid out yet or not? And like, is it lose sight? And like, what does that feel like?
In this room, it is. Look around.
I mean, but it's interesting. This room, which is beautiful.
Thank you.
Is it going to hold up in 3 years? Have we been here, done that? I mean, it's just like this. Felt like a really great idea. I hope the people this space is gorgeous. Yes. But it is an interesting thing. It's like, what
will it work? Yeah.
It's the tricky thing about like, what is modern? How do you define it? How long can it stay modern? And when does it tip to become a classic? And think about the Philippe Starck ghost chair. You guys know that chair? It's like a classic profile, but it's see-through and it's plastic, and it is one of those things in pop culture that's become a now classic. But when it showed up, people were like, is it gonna last? Is it gonna be modern?